Hello, everyone. We are just getting ready to start, and so we're just going to wait here for a minute while everybody in the audience starts coming on. So sometimes that takes just a minute, and I can see, here we go. It's like I hit the start broadcast button, and then these names just start popping up on my screen. This is fantastic. Hi, everybody.
On also, the faces of people that are on?
I wish we could see the faces of people that are on. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. There will be an opportunity for that. Right now, actually, you know what would be really cool is everybody, as you're coming on, if you would just look for the chat function, and you can see that usually if you move your mouse on the screen, you'll see the chat button pop up there. If you would just type in the chat box there, maybe a shout out where you're coming from, where you live, where you're watching from, that'll just give Michael and I an idea of who's coming from where and give us a chance to see who's joining us here. I can see everybody's names, but it'd be really great to hear where you're coming from. Here they come. All right, New Jersey. Brett's coming from Oakland. We have people from the Bay Area, not surprising. This is a good time to do webinars at 5 o'clock Pacific time, that's for sure. British Columbia, Canada. Great. Keep them coming, you guys. It's fantastic. And New Orleans, wow.
Oh, Nance Harding. Hello, Nance.
All right. You can see those okay, Michael?
I see names on the bottom. Are you seeing people's faces or no?
No. Unfortunately, not yet. We will give people an opportunity to do that later if they would like to do that.
This is great.
Unfortunately, but here we go. Israel. Somebody's watching from Israel. Now, this has got to be the middle of the night or maybe early morning in Israel. Texas. Yeah, great. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. It looks like we have people here. Thank you so much for sharing with us, everybody. I just want to welcome you. A lot of you know who I am. My name is Bonnie Bright, and I'm the founder of Depth Psychology Alliance, which is obviously the organization that is making this webinar possible. And I'm here today with Jungian analyst Michael Conforti. Michael, so good to be with you. Good to see you again. Welcome.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, we have a long history together, Michael, and have known each other for several years and have had the pleasure to work together on many occasions. So I'm going to share a little bit about you for everybody who's watching and listening now so that in case they don't know you quite as well as I do, that they will have the opportunity to get to know you a bit better.
Thank you.
So let's jump in. I'm going to go ahead and just read the bio for Michael, and then we can talk a little bit more about what some of that means to us. And meanwhile, I just wanted to let everybody know that if at any point during this conversation you would like to use the chat function to comment or ask questions, you can do that. Everybody will see that. And you can find that chat again by just moving your mouse on the screen. You'll see the button below the picture. And we will have opportunity at the end for questions and answers. So if you would like to ask a question, you will be welcome to do two things. One, you can raise your electronic hand. There's an icon there that looks like a hand, and you can click that, and then we will be able to unmute you. And or you can turn on your camera if you choose to. You don't have to. And the other option, of course, is to type something into the Q&A. So with that, let's jump right in here. Dr. Michael Conforti is a Jungian analyst and the founder-director of the Assisi Institute, the International Center for the Study of Archetypal Patterns. And I know that's a new name for you guys, Michael, and I'm hoping you'll say something about that in just a minute. Let's go on. He has been a faculty member of the CG Jung Institute Boston, the CG Jung Foundation of New York, and in graduate programs in clinical psychology at Antioch, New England. He's a pioneer in the field of matter-psyche studies, and he has presented his work to a wide range of audiences, including the CG Jung Institute Zurich and Jungian organizations in Venezuela, Denmark, Italy, and Canada. And I know you also just came back from Australia. You're heading to Russia later this year. You mentioned that you've been in Colombia, so a lot of things are going on. And Michael is the author of Threshold Experiences, the Archetype of Beginnings, which is really important work that has affected me quite profoundly, and also a book that everybody should know if they don't, and that is Field, Form, and Fate, Patterns in Mind, Nature, and Psyche, which is truly groundbreaking work, Michael. Dr. Conforti maintains a private practice in Mystic, Connecticut, and consults with individuals and corporations around the world. He provides his insights as a sought-after consultant to businesses, government institutions, and the film industry, and I know you have served as a script consultant on a number of films. And Michael was also selected by the Club of Budapest and the University of Potsdam to be a part of a 20-member international team of physicists, biologists, and dynamical systems theorists to examine the role and influence of informational fields. He's a recipient of the Vision Award presented by the Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis. So I feel like I could go on and on, Michael. I know there's so much more, but that's a pretty impressive list there. So I guess we'll leave it at that, and then people should go to the assisiinstitute.com website to find your bio and read more about you there and see some of the other things that you've done. But maybe we can just launch with this really quickly, because I think it's an important piece of what we're about to talk about, and that is that you have recently renamed the Assisi Institute, which has been around for 30 years and has traditionally taken groups to Italy to study there in Assisi, Italy. In fact, I've been there many times myself with your group, and it's been just always so profoundly enlightening. You bring in speakers from all over the world, and we've had a different theme each time that I've attended. Can you just talk about the name change from Assisi Institute?
Well, you know, it happened. I was in Bogota, Colombia, about maybe 3 months ago. Eduardo Cavallo invited me, the person who gave the vision lecture last week. And I realized, you know, here I am in this country, this beautiful country, and I've been all around the world teaching, and we have colleagues from all over the world. And I said, you know what, I think the Assisi Institute, the name has got to reflect the international scope and influence of what we've been doing, like you said, for close to 30 years. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. And I've always loved being involved with different cultures, different languages. I speak Italian and go into different dialects in Italy. We were in Sicily last year. Actually, Laurelie and I both lectured at the international conference in Syracuse. And to me, there's something so powerful about knowing that you have a group around you of colleagues from all over the world, everyone adding their own flavor and their own taste and their own particular insights to a piece of work. And I said, let's do it. And we did it. And it was, I think, a great intuition on my part to put this piece together. And everyone has responded so beautifully. People you know. Susanna Bent is on the phone right now from Australia. Shalit from Israel. Maybe we have in common. So that's why we did it. Yeah. And I feel like it really is capturing the nature of who and what we've been doing for these 30 years.
Yeah, well, that's a great testament to your work, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing and for all the work you do. Let's go ahead and jump into this topic today, because we are here to talk about specifically trauma, which I mean, I'm familiar with your work in the field of dream work, particularly, and also in archetypal pattern analysis. I did the 2-year program certificate that you offer there, and I know that both dreams and archetypal patterns play into the work of trauma. But maybe we can back up just a little bit for the benefit. Obviously, we have people from all different walks of life on this particular webinar, and I know some people have more knowledge than others of it, but maybe let's just start with kind of a base and talk about what trauma is, and a little bit about how traditional psychotherapy treats trauma versus how you prefer to look at it from an archetypal standpoint.
Well, thanks. You know, I think many of us we've gone through our own traumas. And you know, in many ways, I think it represents, on one side, it's an assault. It's an assault to the self. And I think that's why many people have psyches that are fragmented and split as a result of it. The other side is, not that you ever want to say an assault can be a gift, but something profound happens if you work the trauma in your life. So what is it? A trauma is anything that really threatens the life, the physical and psychological life of an individual. Mm. And, you know, why I got into this? Well, you know, aside from knowing about it in my own life, personally, about trauma, I've seen what happens in therapy, what the attitudes are. And all too often, the attitudes are, you know what, we're gonna integrate. Well, some things can't be integrated. I mean, if you have people that have gone through, I mean, not take the Holocaust, a Holocaust, how do you ever integrate the work and the experience of a Holocaust? How do you integrate the loss of a child? You don't. And actually, Ann Ulanov, a woman I deeply love and admire, a truly gifted Jungian analyst out of New York, she gave a course a number of years ago, and it was about a case against forgiveness, a similar title to what Susanna Heschel did for us years ago. And she said, it's an illusion that we're going to integrate these things. She said, we have to find a place somewhere in our psyche, that it's got to live with us. But don't ever talk about integrating and metabolizing. That may not be possible. Mm. And the other things you find so often is we're going to cleanse ourselves. I've had people use that language. We're going to cleanse you of the trauma. This is not a bath. This is not dirt you rub off or an oil you take off your body. And some piece I think you do know about, because we've been together a number of years talking about this work, is I've been deeply, deeply influenced by the work of Elie Wiesel. I had the good fortune of meeting him. One of the highlights of my life, I had a one-on-one meeting with him about 5 years ago in Boston. I've never met a man like that in my life. And as some people say, if there is a modern-day sage, it's Elie Wiesel. So I read his work, and I've been seeped in it for all these years. And I would say the first probably 20 books I read, where he literally, he does it in novel form, right? He tells you about a protagonist, someone who lived through the Holocaust, tries to make a life afterwards. In almost the first 15 or 20 books, there was no hope. He left you with that. And what was strange was, on one hand, he would take you through horror. Excuse me. You feel it, you live it. And I was, especially when I read the book, The Accident, one of probably the most powerful book I've ever read in my life. A little book, maybe 120 pages, called The Accident. And he writes it as a novel, but it's really about his own life. And I know some people that know the back story to that. You read it, and I wept my way through that book, because I felt for the first time in my life, Bonnie, somebody understood what some of us have lived through. And nothing is like the Holocaust. And I made a mistake saying it years ago, and I realized there's nothing like that. But for people that have been through terrible traumas, sometimes there's a person or a couple of people out there that can describe something of what you live with in a way that touches your heart so deeply. There's no technique. There's no strategy. It's not going to get better tomorrow. All that nonsense. But to say, yeah, this is your life. This is something you're going to live with forever. And hopefully, and I think my word comes in, is hopefully you're not possessed by it. You know, what happens to many of us, is many people, is the trauma takes you over. You're taken over, and you live your life for evermore. For many people, where you're always the child of incest, and you repeat it, and you repeat it, and you repeat it. A child that loses a parent at a young age, you repeat abandonment and abandonment and abandonment. Someone who loses a child, one of the greatest horrors in the world. They live as though they're dead, and it goes on and on. Decay and lost opportunity, again and again and again. And on one hand, people say, and I've had people say this in my office, and I've said at times, what are you? Are you cursed? Are you cursed that you can't get out of this sort of Sisyphus, like the myth of Sisyphus? Sisyphus drama where you push and it comes back down. You push, it comes back down. And that's when I realized there's a lot more here.
Yeah.
And the trauma program we developed is really based a lot on the insights of Elie Wiesel and Jung, because they offer a different perspective. And as brilliant and as wonderful as the work of, what's his name? Viktor Frankl, The Man's Search for Meaning and all that, it's still, Frankl and other people, it's still based on the hope. Now, Wiesel, he doesn't talk about hope, but you know what? He never lost his love of God. It's almost unimaginable. And he wrestles with this. And what a model for all of us, that somewhere the self, no matter how dark it is, there's still a flicker somewhere of light. And to be able to live with it, of both pieces. I'm sorry, I'm going on. But
no, that's okay. No, and that's why we're here. I mean, it's so important, I think, to open this up, this topic, because it's not an easy topic to talk about. And most of us who have a background in psychology have that understanding that, as important as it is for people to tell their stories and even be witnessed, which is something that I am really interested in, this idea of witnessing and being able to hold that, it is still often not enough. And you've touched on something that is a common thread, I think, among a lot of people that are trauma victims, and that is that most of them feel, and I think it was, I forget if it was either Robert J. Lifton or Robert Stollerow that talked about this. Both have done a significant amount of work in trauma, but they talk about the fact that when you have undergone some kind of trauma, that you often don't feel like anybody can possibly begin to understand that. If they weren't there, they can't understand it. And so where do you go from that point? You know, that becomes the difficulty, I think.
You know, and I've said to people, I can't imagine what you live through and what you live with. And I've said, and it's not a gimmick, it's not a technique. I really despise a lot of, I don't like gimmicks, and I don't like techniques and strategies. I don't like it. But to really say, I can't imagine what you lived through.
So if we look at that from an archetypal standpoint, how do we begin to enter into that place where people can start making that shift? Because words that come up for me around the idea of trauma, particularly one primary word that comes up is futility. I think a lot of times as that pattern starts to run itself and people are kind of frozen in a particular space in time when that trauma occurred to them, they just experience that futility it's as if the part of the brain, which we know now that the brain is dynamically and biologically changed through experiences of trauma. And it's almost as if that part of the brain that wants us to live, that enjoys being alive, that has the capacity for joy is literally reprogrammed and destroyed and starts running these patterns. That's why when you say that Wiesel never lost his love for God, this is actually probably a special case, or else he had access to some kind of help or healing that maybe not everybody has had the benefit of having.
They've done a couple of pieces. One is I got to give credit to Laura Lee, my wife, Elie Conforti. She introduced me to the term kintsukuroi, which I never heard of before. And it's a Japanese art of repairing very special pottery. And, usually in what we do, if you get a piece of pottery that's broken, unless it's really special, you throw it away. Anyway, with these, it's a long story, but anyway, what they do with it is they get the broken piece and they send it to a craftsperson. And the craftsperson uses gold and gold lacquer, and they repair the piece. Okay, and usually again we'll turn it. Don't let anybody see the broken side. They turn that broken side around so everybody can see it. And kintsukuroi refers to beauty in the broken places. And I heard that, I said, my God, that matches a lot of what I really believe inside. Without being pie in the sky, oh, isn't it beautiful, trauma? Come on. But there is something special that if you can make a life, and you said it before about the sense of no one understands. When I wrote the description for the trauma course, the first round a year ago, I really struggled. I wrote about 4 drafts, and a friend of mine said, Michael, these descriptions stink. They said they're terrible. And they did. And I sat down and I finally wrote it really from my heart. Best way to write, right? And I said, people that have been through trauma don't only lose hope, but they believe that hope is gone even in the world. And then I went on to say something I never thought about before. This is a year old now, right? And I said, I'm beginning to feel that the people that have come through trauma, that live with the reality of that experience, I mean live with it, embody, whatever language you want to use, it's part of them and they know it's real. And they also have hope and joy in their life, and never the same as anybody else, but there still can be some joy. I said, I think they're the real heroes of the world. They're heroes. Because for whatever reason, God, nature, psyche, whatever language we want, has thrown them into the bowels of hell with what they've had to live through. And you know what I'm talking about, right? When people have to go through some of these experiences, and at the same time, sensing there is this other world of something good in the universe. And something about the self is still alive, and they respond to it. Oh my God, these are heroes. So the next part, there's 2 other parts in terms of where the archetypal comes in my opinion. One is a need to begin to reframe the whole idea of memory. Because memory, we have sort of a very relatively simplistic idea until Eric Kandel came out, he got the Nobel Prize for his work, and he's done a lot of great work in memory. Memory, we talk about as storage and retrieval. Get the file, Bonnie, and let's put it away, and we take out when we need it. People that have been through trauma are often affected by flashback, flooding, and recall, and all this. And I realized the memory is really a telling of the field, two languages here, right? Memory and field, of the field that they're in. You will always be in the field of if somebody's been orphaned, somebody has a parent who dies at a young age, or whatever the particular trauma, that's a field. And that field doesn't go away with treatment. And that's one of the archetypal pieces with this. I think that's the beauty of Jung's work. That when you realize these fields, these archetypes are autonomous, you don't create them and you don't make them disappear. And when somebody realizes that this is a field that I'm in for whatever reason, you begin to see that it's not just a field of deprivation. I mean, for instance, somebody who's been orphaned. I had a case in New York of someone many, many years ago, and the experience was repeated time and again. with relationships, with jobs, and on and on and on. Everything in this person's life resulted in abandonment. And he was orphaned yet again and again. And I also saw that this guy had an uncanny sense of predictions and forecasting and synchronicities. And it dawned on me, I said, what could it be? That here's this guy, he comes from this kind of beginning, a wonderful man, right? He went on to make a very good life for himself. And he has this proclivity towards psychic experience, synchronicities. And he would play in New York lotteries and earn money with lotteries. And I realized it's because when many people come into the world and there's a good enough mom and dad and home secure, we put our feet down and we know we're going to touch the earth. Somebody come from that kind of background, you literally reach down and you're into another world, into another universe. So the archetypal for that person is primary, where it's for many of us, the material world and the maternal environment offers a certain buffer, a necessary buffer in the beginning of life, so that we're not inundated with the absolute power of psychic reality. There's a buffer. There ain't no buffer. There is no buffer when you come into the world, and there's no mother and father and no maternal hold. And you realize, when you look at archetypally, this may be the field of this individual. And then the treatment, I don't want to call it treatment, the work maybe. Maybe you give me a better word. Of course, it's looking at the issues and the emotions. That's a big part of course. You spend years talking about the emotional experiences and helping them be honest with themselves about the experience. Then looking at the repetitions. And then at some point when the feet are more solidly planted on the ground, you realize you also were given, a strange word, a gift of this incredible relationship to psychic reality and psychic experience. You put those pieces together, and I think that you have a life of somebody that's been through this particular thing. So in many ways, this is where I work in pattern analysis, which you're a graduate of, the pattern analyst training program. You begin to look at the different archetypal patterns and the pattern responses of trauma, for one, which are universal, they're not personal. And then the patterns, the universal patterns one is introduced into as a result of the trauma. That takes you totally out of the world of pathology. And it was Jung that made that beautiful quote. He said, I'm really not interested in therapy necessarily. And I'm not interested in the work on neuroses. He said, if therapy cannot expose one to the reality of the numinous and the transcendent, it's really not that valuable. And that I came to by doing the actual work with people that have been traumatized. And I realized that's been my specialty for about 30 years, people that have been through some really terrible, terrible experiences.
Yeah. So I mean, this is really profound. And of course, as you're speaking, I feel it in my own body as I really try to open up and listen to that. And for me, that's always a sign that there's something landing there, that there's something authentic that is important about what it is that's coming into, I guess, the field, here, that's with us here and now, for between us and also everybody who's here viewing this and listening to this. That field is so critically important. And so I'd like to see if we could dig a little bit more into that, because it's true, I've had the benefit of 2 years with you and being able to really spend some time thinking about this and writing about it and exploring it. But it's one of those things that's still kind of nebulous for a lot of people, because it's invisible, right? It's not necessarily perceivable unless we start to slow down and pay attention to it exactly as we are doing in this moment. So I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit more about that, because you said it's there. Often we're born into it. It's something that exists independently of us. It's autonomous. So the question is, and I guess this is kind of a trick question, because I think I know the answer based on my own experience with you.
Well, tell me the answer.
I want to hear it from you again. I think that the question is, can we change that field? Or how do we escape it, if that's what it is? Or are we stuck with actually just living with that field that is having clearly some kind of very dramatic effect on us, if not traumatic?
It's such great timing. We're talking about this today. I just wrote a description. I'm giving lectures in Washington, D.C. in April. And I'm doing it talking about fate and destiny. And I said, to paraphrase what I wrote earlier today, that if you look at the currents of life, just even the currents of water, right? You're watching the waters and you have high tide and all the water is rushing in. And as water rushes in towards the shore, all the things that were out there, logs and boats that have been not anchored, whatever, they're all going to be coming in with that tide. When the tide goes out, anything that's not tethered is going to go out with the tide. Mm-hmm. And the currents of life are strong like that. And when you look at a life and you reel about it, I mean, you know, really being honest about a life, you say, there's something that's been taken over my life for a long time. Look at the replicative patterns. How often do we see that we're caught in a certain cycle of behavior? For some people, it's a cycle of abuse. Some people, it's a cycle of tremendous, tremendous creativity. Other people, it's a cycle of being stuck in the mud. And you say, God, you know, it seems like no matter where you go, it's like, what's that cartoon in Peanuts? The kid with the little dust over his head all the time?
Pigpen.
What's that?
Pigpen is his name.
Pigpen. You know, we do have these things that we seem to be embedded in. And the way I got there was not through theory. I got there by just looking at the ever-presence of these patterns in people's lives, and there seemed to be something that would easily take over a life unless you did something. That's why the image of the currents, you know, I do a lot of deep sea fishing and boating, and I said you have to have some kind of navigational force or energy if you're in the currents. You know, I remember one day I was out fishing, one of the early days, I was out there by myself. I shouldn't have been. I wasn't really knowledgeable enough of the waters and the reef system, and I'm catching a lot of fish, and I'm happy, and all of a sudden behind me, and I see all these rocks that were not there an hour ago, and my boat is drifting towards these rocks. And I did remember suddenly a lot of people excuse me, die there every year because it's a hidden reef until low tide. I was terrified, Bonnie. And I put that boat in, and thank God I got a good, and I got out of there quickly. And I went to the marina afterwards. I told him the story. I said, I was terrified. And the guy, high school educated man, he said to me, you know, Mike, don't be terrified, be informed. I said, oh my God, that's brilliant. He said, learn about tides, high tides, low tides. So in terms of your question, I mean, when you find yourself in these ongoing fields and you can't seem to kick out of them, number one, you realize there is something you're not able to kick out of right now. That's big difference. And if you want analogies from the physical world, we have fields. We got gravity, we have electromagnetic fields, and on and on. I mean, maybe 4 major fields. And you know that life on Earth in many ways is predicated on the solid working of these fields. So that's a fact of life. And Jung went on to say that, it was a great comment, he said, if you look at the archetypes are really even the morphology of the psyche and the soul, meaning there's something shaping what happens. Okay. And then when you look at a life and you say there really is something shaping, there is something there. Okay. There's fields. So now your question, which is what we all hope to God is true, that there can be, especially in a field that hurts us, where we're unable to really use our abilities. And because when you're stuck in a non-generative field, your parameters get more and more narrowed. So all the different gifts you have and the strength you have, they're not able to be accessed when these things are closing in on us. So I don't think that the fields ever change. That's where I'm at with this. What you do is you change your alignment to fields. That's the difference. Okay? I mean, you're not going to change gravitational field, but the rocket ships have a way of breaking through of the gravitational influence. People, like they mentioned, people that are orphans or whatever the particular trauma is, I've seen firsthand what it looks like when you begin to see their emergence from that. And it's the most incredible feeling in the world. In our own lives, and especially other people we care about, love, family, or patients, what have you, clients, and you see that, my God, they're breaking out of this thing that had them a stranglehold on their lives, and the lives were getting more and more circumscribed to the parameters of that trauma. And you see it begin to open and open, and you say, my God, this is incredible. And the word is, it's not therapy. That's grace when that happens, when that opening occurs. So, yeah, so the short end of this answer then is you don't change. If fields are ontological and fields are archetypal, fields are omnipresent. They're not humanly created. You never change an archetype. You change, what can you change is your relationship to it. The devouring mother, father, whatever, is going to be there. An over-identification with the puer or the puella will always be there. And that's where the ego comes in. And the next part of it with trauma, in terms of what seems to really help, how do you break these possessions? And this is something that I think we often forget. Because so much of psychology, like dream work, has become a matter of subjective personal experiences. What do you think and what do you feel? Let's change it. I'm doing a seminar right now on Wednesdays. We got a very big turnout for it. I've never offered it before, on unconscious communication and unconscious experience. And when you look at what people really talk about and what they're really communicating through their stories, you see the self talking through them about their experience. So people that have been traumatized and people that have created trauma to others, it goes both ways, unfortunately. When you can begin to make the unconscious conscious, and you know who said that? A good friend, Freud. I know we want to kind of badmouth all the Freud stuff. He made some brilliant observation when he said, make the unconscious conscious. And when you could see that you could help somebody see what the experience was like, either having been orphaned or orphaning your in your own life, orphaning whether your own gifts, your talents, or your own children. Take people that are alcoholics. One reality is many times a family is really neglected, not intentionally, but as a result of whatever addiction it might be, from sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The family and the kids and the dance recital and the baseball games and the spelling bee and whatever, you just really can't make it. And at some point, there's got to be, like in Ovid's Metamorphosis, when you see the reflection pool, the whole reflection episode, at some point, and I think this is where a big part of healing comes in, when you could look and say, my God, this really is the truth of what I've done in my life. Not to blame, not to say you're terrible, it's not it, but say, I will accept it. Yes, and maybe I repeated with my kids what happened to me as a child.
Yeah, there has to be a place where that stops. Obviously, this kind of intergenerational trauma that happens is a really interesting thing. And you're pointing to something actually that has been really important to me, and that is the study of and the idea of cultural trauma. Cultural and historical trauma, and trauma that is proliferated, whether we like it or not, whether we're aware of it or not. Each one of us, I think, on some level, is both exposed to quite extreme trauma just with what's going on on the planet. First of all, and I know it was Stolero who talked about the age of trauma, and he suggested that all of the illusions that we have about our own safety are starting to be challenged. Part of that might be the proliferation of media and how much we're exposed to being able to see what's actually going on. But part of it is that I think a lot of us are becoming maybe even more sensitive and paying more attention than we have ever paid, and therefore this the way that it can overwhelm us through sort of sensory input is contributing to our trauma. So I wonder if you can just say a few words about how you perceive that kind of cultural trauma, how all of us are affected by it, even with or without having other experiences of trauma, and how we can apply the archetypal perspective to that kind of collective trauma.
No, it's a very important piece of bringing up. Jung in the Red Book, he made a comment. I never knew he had ever said this, and I read it over 5 times. Is he really saying it? He said there are times when even the gods grow too old and too weary. Isn't that incredible? Right now, a lot of the structures that held us before, religion, hopefully spirituality, some political figures that we did believe in, that did have some shred of justice and goodness in them, this stuff is breaking down, Ronnie. You know it. You did with the collapse of the bee colonies, a different issue, but there's so much collapsing around us, and I think in many ways we are really in peril right now, because with the death of these old regimes, from religion again to politics, whatever, and family. How many families? I mean, I grew up in a big Italian, a small nuclear family, but a huge extended family, where we would have on Sundays 30, 40 people eating together. We would always have meals with the 3 or 4 of us together every night. You don't see that much anymore. And that having the loss of the nuclear family, it creates a lot of problems, because you need somewhere you go and you say, you know what, I'm home, and I'm home, I'm safe. I got people who love me. Somebody will fight for me no matter what. Who do we trust today? I mean, in the world, who do we trust? I mean, well, it's Russia. We can't trust the Russians. And then the Syrians. It goes on and on and on. And I mean, Jung made that comment how many years ago, in the 30s or 40s? He said, the world is hanging by a thread. Mm-hmm. And he said, what's needed is a understanding and a way to bring psyche into the world. And I think it's true. To find out, what are the gods and goddesses that really are vital? Where is, what are examples of the really generative, powerful feminine in the world today? It's coming. I don't want to get into politics, but, we've seen a couple of upstarts in world politics around it. It's so desperately needed, So, yeah, I think there's a lot of culture. I grew up, we're Sicilian, half Sicilian and half other Southern Italian. And the trauma of the Sicilian people has been with our family ever since. And, we're second generation. We didn't grow up there. I was in Sicily lecturing, and I did a whole paper about that, the Sicilian psyche. And what I called it, you'd appreciate, I said, fighting for what is precious for you. Being willing to fight for what's precious. And, we need to identify what is precious. That's, I think we're losing touch with that. And when we try to identify what's precious and what our real life totems are, the good totem, only through the conscious mind, it's not enough. And that's where I think we need more and more ways to access the deeper unconscious.
Yeah, and traditional therapy certainly is not giving that. Hence the movement toward an archetypal perspective and being able to look from a depth psychological perspective is so critical to us. I remember seeing a documentary, it's been a few years ago now, about a young woman who, when she was about 19, developed out of the blue this completely unexpected from, the surface of things at least, eating disorder. And she just was put her life almost in immediate danger because it came on so quickly, and she just stopped eating basically and was severely anorexic. And she had made a documentary about this because what turned out that she found out later was that her mother had been interred in one of the Nazi camps at exactly that same age, like literally the age and I think almost a month to date, and had been severely deprived of food at that point in time. And so she was carrying this trauma in her. And we've seen a lot of studies lately that are just starting to come out with our advancements in neuroscience showing us that now we can see how trauma is passed down from one generation to another generation. And so finding ways, it's like, where does the buck stop? It's that old thing. I think that it's so important for us to be aware of what traumas we are each carrying, even if we don't remember very specific ones, or especially if we do remember very specific ones, to start looking at this archetypal perspective and identifying that field just as you're talking about, so that we can start changing that alignment. That was such a visual and critical way for you to describe that.
And that story, I never heard that before, that story about the anorexic woman. That's a profound story. I mentioned having met with Elie Wiesel. And when I went to meet him, one of the questions, he said, would you have any questions for me? I said, a million of them, but I only have a half an hour to be here. I said, what do you feel about the role of therapy and pastoral counseling and all that when it comes to one who's lived through the unimaginables? And I didn't have to describe my language. I didn't have to define unimaginables. And he said something I'll never, ever forget. You may have heard me tell the story in one of the Assisi events. He said, the work in being with someone, when you sit with someone who's been through the unimaginables, the only response is a moral one. M-O-R-A-L, moral. I said, in all due respect, Dr. Wiesel, I don't understand what you mean it's a moral response. He said, do you have a moral obligation, responsibility to just be as present as you can? In the absence of words, the absence of anything, technique, to just sit there. And then again, I recall, so many times in my office, before I ever heard of Wiesel, whatever, there'd be times when the room is just swirling. When when that field is reconstellated, the trauma. Yeah. And I would literally hold on the bottom of my chair because you feel this thing just swirling, and you want to take off with your own manic defenses or their manic defenses, and would hold on to the chair to just try to say, you know what, I'm not running. Mm. You do it by behaving, not the words. The words ultimately become cheap. They become cheap. It's what you do by your experience. But when he said to a moral response, I said, man, how brilliant, how brilliant. And it's not from the head. He meant to just sit with, not just, but to sit with somebody, to have the courage, to sit with somebody who's maybe lost a child, lost a parent, who's seen the brutal assaults from one parent to another, to see a body ravaged with whatever. I mean, this is real life. And I know we don't want to look at it and talk about it, but I tell you, the response we had to the trauma program last year, we have more responses every week. People saying it's so affirming to hear these words, because I know it's real, people would say. And I had so many therapists trying to tell me it's going to go away, it's going to get better, meditate it away, levitate it away, gyrate it, whatever. And all those things are wonderful and relevant. But unless there is that, I'll call it Wiesel's moral attitude that says, just shut up for a minute. This person lost their mother or their father when they're 5 years old. This person lost their child. Shush, be quiet for a minute. Enter that moment of hell, profundity, and hope to God there can be that glimmer somewhere of light coming in again, that they don't want to enter the grave with that deceased parent or child, which is what happens. That's the pattern, the universal archetypal pattern responses. And that's the other thing I've been looking at really intensively, that there are these responses that are not personal. Of course, it's your personal experience, but when you see so many people that have been through similar experiences react similar ways. I mean, look, all the groups, children of alcoholic parents and children of this and children of that and whatever. So you had that too, your parents, oh my God, you have that tendency. And you realize, yeah, because it's that archetypal field that begins to be so strong that it begins to eclipse individual life and discernment. That's why I think an archetypal approach is so meaningful for this work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was listening, I think it was, listening to Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a pretty important book, and I don't know why the name is escaping me now. Somebody will know. Maybe you can type it in the chat. Has the word body in it. But he was talking about about patients that have come back from Vietnam specifically, who were taking Rorschach tests and looking at these. And he said out of 17 participants who had looked at this Rorschach test, on the second one, color is introduced into it. And 16 out of 17 people who saw that second slide or second image had almost the exact same response out of 17. And it was all about their experience in the military. And I don't think he actually said it in what I was reading or listening to, but I assume it was the color red that was introduced in there. And therefore, people were, but he said standardly, a lot of people will talk about butterflies, or, they'll refer to something else that's maybe a little bit more whimsical on that second slide. But of these people who had PTSD, who had returned from Vietnam, 16 out of 17 had almost an identical response. And if you don't think, if that's not indicative that a field is at work in that, I just felt that was so powerful. Thank you, Eva. That book is called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. So you know what I've been thinking a lot about, and I want to make sure we have some time for questions here. So we're going to go ahead and open it up in just a minute. But and if people have questions, please type them in, or you can start raising your hands now. But I was just thinking about how, this realignment that you're talking about, the realignment to the field and coming into a different kind of relationship with something that is already there and can't necessarily be gotten rid of, nor maybe from a depth psychological standpoint would we want to get rid of it, because we all know that there's so much value there in that underworld stuff, and really being able to dig in and go through it. It's an initiation of sorts. If we're able to actually realign ourselves and come into some kind of relationship, it becomes more of an initiation process, a ritual process, than just being constantly into pathological relationship with it, if that's the case. And I'm thinking Ed Casey, who was one of my professors at Pacifica and is really a profound thinker philosophically, and he's written an amazing book called Getting Back into Place, which I highly recommend if anyone's interested in that. He talks about spatial areas of transition. And basically the idea is just that trauma, I think, can move us into a new threshold, to a new place from which we can begin again and move into a space where we can begin to understand at least what that is about, and then start that process of realigning ourselves.
Yeah, in terms of a new place, something I've been thinking more about in terms of trauma lately is, okay, we begin to look at the trauma that we've been caught in. What happened to us? Let's say us as victims or recipients of the trauma. More and more, I'm beginning to fine tune and realize, okay, the next part of the question is going to be, let's say you saw the unimaginable violence in a home, and you have dreams of the violence coming back to you. A big question, in addition to the experiences you went through, where are you unconsciously repeating this trauma? Where you are being your own assailant.
Mm.
That's huge.
Mm.
Say, you know what, by the way you're living or by the way one's going about their life. Again, it's not blame, please. That's the furthest thing from my mind. Repetition is autonomous. Repetition is impersonal, transpersonal. So when you say, you know what, I wonder if there's some way that parent with the gun or the knife that did the horrible things in your home, is that reflective in the certain tendency of the way you're living your life? Where you're marginalizing your own life? Mm-hmm. Where you're living in a way that you don't give yourself enough of the pleasure that could be in life? Or when you do X and Y and you say you wonder why it doesn't bring you pleasure, that may be the you don't like the language, but the introject of that experience, where that archetypal field is still working, and it's still working as figures in your psyche where you remain both the victim and the assailant. Oh my God. And it pushes again a certain, I don't want to say moral at that point, but a responsibility to say, my God, it never dawned on me that when I make the choice to do X and X so often, it's a certain iteration of the horror that was done to me. Different scale, but it's still an iteration of that horror. That's the newest piece of that. That's almost brand new. I know many of us know that, but I kind of go stage by stage.
Yeah.
To focus now on where am I playing that out in subtle and not so subtle ways, and creating so much so much lack of whatever in our life.
Yeah. I think it's a critical piece. And it's like you say, we all sort of find these pieces as they're meaningful to us, right? And so, I mean, there's kind of no such thing as a new idea, because there's always somebody who's sort of a push in some way, shape, or form. I know that Donald Kalshed has done some work on that, on how we actually, our own egos really try to protect us, and in fact, they end up kind of re-traumatizing or traumatizing us further around that. So if people are interested in reading that, you should look up Donald Kalshed's work, and I'm sure, Michael, you probably have some other sources. We do have a question, so I'm going to go ahead and start moving to questions now. Since we are limited on time, I'd just like to remind everybody to please keep your questions short. If you'd like to speak, you're welcome to speak. I'll unmute you, and then if you want to turn on your camera, you can. You do not have to, absolutely. It's completely your choice. But let's go ahead and go to the question. First of all, somebody was asking the name of the author that you were referring to. Michael, I believe that he was referring to, I think what you're asking is Elie Wiesel, E-L-I-E, Wiesel, W-I-E-S-E-L. Hopefully that answers.
And the one book I recommended, the best book I've ever read, probably one of the best, is called simply The Accident.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to some comments and questions. So I have a comment, from Megan. She says, this is more a comment than a question. I believe we who have been traumatized are actually responsible for changing the story or the archetypal field. We do this through changing the story in and with our own patterns, and thus influence others who are also in that particular story or field. This is the service. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, it's a gift. I mean, if you think of it as somebody who's been embedded in that field and they know something about it, that they know something about the behaviors, the emotions, the tendencies, and if you're in a role where you can help people, it's wonderful. But at the other side of it, you also want to be careful it doesn't become messianic, that we feel like we have the responsibility for the world. If you can help people in whatever role you have, I think it's fantastic. And this is where, if you think about it, where the work of pattern analysis comes in, by being able to articulate the nature of some of these different fields and patterns. Mm-hmm. So on a big answer, I think it's one, or maybe short part of it, yes, I think it's fantastic, because they are aware of the parameters, and hopefully they've done a lot of work themselves on that field. Yeah.
And as Jung said, I mean, it always starts with the individual. If we don't do our own work, there's no way that the people around us can that we can expect that change to occur. So it's like ripples in a pond. It's so important that because obviously if we're traumatized, whatever is happening to us and around us and the way that we're responding to things is going to affect people that we live with on a close basis, especially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Megan. Let's go to Mary has a question. Mary, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. So we should be able to hear you momentarily. If you'd like to start your video, you can do that by rolling your mouse on the screen, and then you'll just see the start video button in the left, bottom left there. But feel free to just talk if you prefer that. Okay, we should be able to hear you, Mary. Oh, if I unmute you. Sorry. Go ahead. Now I can hear you. Mary, I heard you for just a second there. Go ahead. Oh, we had Mary. Are you there?
We've got the rule of silence.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm going to leave you unmuted, Mary, and if you find that you can speak up, please do. And meanwhile, I'm going to go to another question. Okay, so this is a written question, and Michael's asking, Michael, I'm an educator. Any thoughts around trauma-informed care in our schools with children and youth who are in pain? And I think, Michael, you might be the one who actually did a long post on Depth Psychology Alliance in the forum or the blog section on this. So, great question. Any thoughts around trauma-informed care in our schools with children and youth who are in pain?
Well, I love stories, okay? And there's often a story that I had my own life that answers some of these questions. Anyway, I was up in Edmonton, Canada, a number of years ago, and I was working as a liaison between the Native communities and the Western communities. And I was working with one of the Indian chiefs, a woman chief, and she told this incredible story. She said she had a dream, and she said, oh, the big spirit told me, they kind of talk like North Dakota, that the spirit told me I have to go teach, get a doctorate, and I got to go teach. She said, I don't want to teach, I don't want a doctorate. She said, oh, you have to. So she went out and got it, and then the spirit said, okay, you got doctorate, now you got to teach. Okay, so she got a job in a high school, and she walked into classes of an indigenous community up in Edmonton, Canada, and there were all like 50 kids in the class, maybe 30 kids, and they're all rows. You know, like we do in grammar school, all the rows. And she said, oh, this is not good for my people. And she knew they had a rate of like 90% dropouts by the second year of high school. So she got in there, she said, okay, we take away the rows, and she said, we make a circle, because our people want circles. And she made a circle. And she knew something about every kid. Oh, your father did this, your mama did that, and whatever. And she said after 2 years there, because she knew that part of the trauma wasn't being repeated in the classroom, they worked by way of a native circle. You can't put them and impose them in a classroom like everybody else. And she restored that native soul to them. And you know what, Bunny? She said it went from like 80% dropout to like 5% in 2 years. I guess that big spirit knew what he meant, or knew what she wanted of me. And I think when you realize, if you have a sense of what the patterns are and where the wounds are, you could do subtle and not so subtle things. Mm-hmm. And it's a gift. I would love to see this work brought into with younger people. I would love it. To teach young kids about patterns, just the world around them. And then as Michael, I think you said his name, as he's asking, when you're aware of some of the traumas. Mm-hmm. I look at my own background. We grew up all Italian people, Italian Americans, and so many of the kids are so hung up, they're going to be rocky, they're going to be tough, they're going to be mafia. And a lot of these kids drop out before they finish high school. And they get jobs as truck drivers, bartenders, the longshoremen, they work on the waterfront. And their lives are so marginalized because they idealize these models of the gangster and the tough guy. To open that up, yeah, come on, what a gift! Mike was asking a wonderful question. He's in a great position to make some wonderful changes with people.
Yeah, which I mean, just to sort of finish the thought on that, I guess, is of course those fields, the mobster and all of that are fields that are already at work in these people's lives. So again, it's not like it's going to go away somewhere, but coming into some relationship with that so that it can improve a person's life can be so profound. I'm thinking about in some of the Native American and indigenous rituals where the initiate was coming back through the village after the initiation was over. There was a ritual where the villagers would open all their doors as the initiate passed, and it was to symbolize the opening of the way. The opening of the new way to come through. I wrote a paper that I really like, and I haven't read it in a while, but it's called Trauma and Homecoming, and focuses a lot on eco-psychological issues and what's happening to our planet, that I would be happy to make available if anybody's interested in that. Maybe you could just type in the chat or something, and I can post it somewhere where you can see it. So I'm seeing a screen sharing with somebody that's on there. I'm going to take that off. Hold on one second. figure out how to do that. I think, Mary, I should have probably stopped you there. Hold on one.
Some phone.
Let's see, it's just a little process here. There we go. Okay, so we do have a couple more questions. Let's see if we can get to those before we end here. So Lucille is asking, how do you answer the question about death, especially if the person was younger in their 30s and grandmother is still alive in their 90s? Recently, a number of people in my nephew's life have died in the past year. They think that God has done this on purpose. Yeah, so the idea sometimes of punishment, I think, comes quite profoundly into people that are experiencing trauma. This is a big question for our last 5 minutes, so I don't know how you want to touch on that, Michael, but maybe...
well, both sides, either one is cursed or one is blessed. I remember when my mother was dying, about 10, 15 years ago now, one of our relatives who came from a family of very famous rabbis, actually very famous rabbis, he said, well, God takes the good ones. Mm-hmm. You know, so on one hand, God takes the good one, another one, I'm cursed. So on one hand, I think what we do is we try to create we create meaning, right? We create meaning of these things. And remember Jung's whole point, which I love, when he said, you know, we don't need to make meaning of images because the meaning is implicit. So on one hand, what do you do with early death experiences? On one hand, you know what, a tough thing to admit, I think, there may not be parity in the world. There's nothing just, and even the Bible says a parent should never outlive their child. These are, and you know, look, and I gave a series of lectures on this whole theme of parents and losing children. And I said, I think one of the reasons it's so traumatic is because it's against the natural order of life. When there is an affront to the universal processes of life, and there are universals, that's, you know, we wouldn't be here, and you got what, 4,500 people in your community right now, Depth Psychological Alliance, if you didn't have an awareness of universals. When there is something that totally disrupts that natural life process, it's a collective and a personal and a huge trauma. I mean, what do you tell somebody? Say, look, there's no way to understand this. And I'm not going to try to make myself feel better by creating God because God loves you or God did you curse. None of that may be true. We don't know. But say, I again go back to Wiesel and say, I have no idea why something just happened. It feels like a horrible trauma. It feels so unjust. You want another injustice? You want to go with injustice? They say psychopaths rarely get sick. Did you know this? Psychopaths in jail rarely get sick. So now we got to develop psychopathic envy. You know?
I hope not. Yeah.
It's a very passionate thing this woman's asking, and it rips you open. If you want to be real about it, we strip away all of that. It's because of this. Say, I don't know, and it hurts like hell to see this happen.
Yeah.
I remember when my son was just being born, I was teaching a doctoral program at Antioch, and I had to make a site visit for one of my students who was working at cancer clinic for children. I got there early. I had to walk around seeing things. I did everything I could to hold myself there because I was ready to run out of there, Bonnie, because I knew a lot of these kids would never get out. Mm-hmm. It ripped me open. You tell me where there's justice in it.
Yeah.
There's parity. I mean, we create constructions, and who was it? Ernest Becker said we create vital lies to survive.
That's right. Yeah. There's no way to wish it away, and there's no way to logically explain it. So that's, and I think everybody who's in it understands that on some level. That you just can't begin to. Yeah. All right, we have more questions coming, and we have about 2 more minutes. So let's see if we can get to 1 or 2 more. So Neil is asking, is there a key awareness process involved in converting non-generative to generative patterns? He said it seems to be a key intermediary point in the change process, which it is.
No, something I've come to over the years is hunger. There's got to be a hunger. I mean, have you ever laid down at night and you said, I would give anything, hopefully anything, for the experience of being loved, for having the sense that somebody really cares that much about me and I can care that much about them. A sense of, you know, I want to have a more active participation in life. I'm tired of this, of going around and around and around and circumambulating the same little yard all the time. I want a shot. The hunger makes you aware of, number one, that you're caught. And also makes you aware that there may be food somewhere. Even if you know you can't get it. You don't have to be shackled like Tantalus, to always be tantalized what you cannot have, but to say, it may be out there somewhere. I don't have it right now, but you know what? I could smell it cooking. I see the person over there. They have it in their life. It's so powerful.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, sometimes it's that grace you were talking about, Michael, because a lot of times we live with these sort of struggles all of our lives, and all of a sudden one day something changes, and it's because we were ready for it to change. And I'm not saying that's all, and you can't make it happen when you want it to happen. It's just part of the bigger pattern, I think, that we don't understand. But boy, those times when that's happened for me in my life, I've just experienced so much gratitude, because finally it was ready to change. And I'm not saying we can't do anything about it, but certainly in conjunction with whatever that is, being in relationship with that, I think is part of what brings us to that point.
Timing is huge. Somebody I'm working with, we've been talking about this particular trauma for 2 years. And she said the other day, how come you never mentioned this before?
It comes back to that hearing things when you're ready to hear them, right?
Ready to hear them. I said, well, I'm glad we heard it today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go for one last question, you guys. And this is coming from Mary, who was trying to talk. I guess maybe she had some trouble with her microphone, but she's written it here, so I'll go ahead and read it. And then we'll start our wrap-up process. Gosh, I feel like we could go on forever with this, so I so appreciate it.
You're so wonderful in doing it. You're such a wonderful interviewer to draw out conversation.
Well, my goal is to let you talk as much as possible. So, but let's do this last question and see where it leaves us off, and then we'll say our goodbyes at that point. So Mary's asking, don't we as Jungian analysts spend our time dancing around the love of God, which Wiesel talked about? Is analysis a prelude for luminosity?
Wow. I remember when I was really working on the Red Book stuff, I was doing a number of courses on it. And I realized something that I'm sure many people realized way before I did, that Jung really didn't care so much about psychology. Psychology for him was a metaphor to talk about the spiritual life. Okay? I think there's a lot of gold and truth in what she's saying, because I think ultimately the work in dealing with archetypes and fields and possessions and all the things we're talking about, it's really dealing with at root is the transcendent and the transpersonal. And this is one of the reasons why I've been on the bandwagon for years. Part of it is it's to stop deifying the personal. So she's right that ultimately it can open you up to something so much bigger to do this. I mean, look, when you're caught in a trauma, which is the theme for tonight, your world becomes very small. And it becomes peopled with individuals that one way or another most likely will repeat some version of that trauma. What a gift and illumination, or the grace, spiritual, whatever you want to call it. It comes in when you open that window and you say, my God, you get some fresh air into this. And I do think this work ultimately really is about a spiritual practice. Without all the bells and whistles, without having to even say the words, especially in the beginning. But if you can convey that by your incredible receptivity to this other domain. So very powerful comment she's making.
Yeah, very powerful. That's a great way to end it, because I think it leaves us sort of with our foot on that path to, what do we want? What are we hungry for? How willing are we each to engage with our own trauma that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis sometimes? And yeah, what's the next thing? So I just have such a gratitude for depth psychology and the power that it has for us to be able to tap into something that can help us with the understanding and the healing, which are so critical. So Michael, I'm so appreciative of the work that you do. I wanted to just remind everybody that Michael's starting a 9-month certificate program in trauma, the language of trauma, and that starts on March 7th. So you still have time to join that. That's primarily a series of webinars that are done similar to this, and then there is one residential, I think, that's involved with that people can go to and actually meet the rest of the community in person. And I can say for the community that you've gathered, Michael, is really, really amazing. I've experienced it many times, and you've just been such an incredible leader in that. So really grateful for that. And the faculty that you put together for that program, I mean, people will know who they are. Everybody from out in Belanoff, you mentioned them, to Ed Tick, who I had a chance to meet recently. And
oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Gilda, part of it, Gilda Franz. Mm-hmm. Guggenbuhl is part of it from Switzerland. Ursula Wirtz is part of it. Really great people.
Yeah, fantastic. So you have a really gathered a tremendous group of people there together, and so I encourage everybody to go check that out. You also have the vision lectures, which are running. The first one just happened. It was offered for free, but the other 5 still remain. People can tap into those, and you have some amazing people, each from a different country each month, who are going to be making offerings there, including our friend Ariel Shalit and also Susanna Benson, we mentioned, who is head of Association for Dreams in Australia. So good to see you here, Susanna. I wanted to acknowledge Jane Knox, who says hello to both of us, and also Peter Cameron. Thank you for your comments. He's thanking us for a great session. I just wanted to let everybody know that Depth Psychology Alliance is offering a few upcoming events that you might be interested in. On March 1st, we're having a deep meet and greet. So if you just want to come hang out for story sharing and some soul, that's hosted by 2 of our board members, Mark Sipowicz and Donna May. And also, there was one question we didn't get to, Michael, and I don't think we can go there now because I'd like to wrap this up, but Darrow was asking if we could talk about places that have experienced trauma and how places have experienced trauma, and how trauma certainly can repeat itself in certain places. So that's really a topic of parapsychology and the psychology of place. I think we could do an entire session on that alone, and it's something that's really interesting to me, but I encourage people who are interested. We're going to have an upcoming 6-week session on parapsychology that starts toward the end of March. So people can look for that. I don't know if it's been posted yet, but it will be any day now in the events section. So all right, so I think that's it for now. Lots of other stuff. Come check out Depth Psychology Alliance. Please definitely go to assisiinstitute.com and see the upcoming programs that Michael has, and get involved somehow, one way or another. And we just really encourage everybody to go out and extend Depth Psychology in the world and do your own work.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you again for all that you offer here and for the wonderful work you do with the Depth Psychology Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for being here. See you next time.
All right, bye-bye.